Good morning, everyone. I am absolutely delighted to be here today. I must be very honest. When I received the call from the director of European Network of Migrant Women to be here today, I was thinking there is absolutely no connection in terms of what I do and participation in terms of politics. But essentially, everything that we all do is very connected. So I'll tell you a tiny bit about myself, and then I'll present so that you can be able to understand where I'm coming from. I grew up in Kenya, but I did not fly from Kenya today. I grew up in Kenya, which is in East Africa. But today, actually, I'm here representing European Network of Migrant Women from Ireland. So I live in Dublin, and I have lived there for the last 15 years. And I'm an accountant by profession, so I'm in the financial services, have been in the last 15 years. I've also been in activism for the last 12 years. And during the time of my migration into Ireland, it was a time of the Celtic Tiger. So essentially, for anybody who doesn't understand what that is, it was a time of the boom. Loads of jobs, loads of opportunities, loads of potential for everybody. And then the recession hit around 2008, 2009. I believe you'd all perhaps know. And Ireland was one of the countries in Europe which was hugely affected, including Iceland. And essentially, a couple of years after that, I lost my job. And it was a catch-22 around, should I go back to Kenya? Should I maybe not, But you see, as a human being, money is never enough. Never. So it doesn't matter how good your salary is, you can, you still want to think, well, I think I can make a bit of money, I'll see how things will go. So essentially, I never went back. But there were no jobs at the time, or rather, I couldn't get a job at the time. So I looked at my own country, the country I came from, and I set up a business in Ireland at the time, which was still difficult. And the business was it was encompassing Kenya at the time. So it was on exports. It was survey around export of agricultural products, infrastructure. It was around looking at cars, for example, tippers and tractors, and seeing how those can be able to be used in Kenya by farmers, which can essentially lead to large-scale farming. Now, Kenya is one of the fastest developing countries at the moment, and some of the things they would need would be things which are hugely progressive in a country like Ireland. And I set up the business, but it was still very difficult because I'm not from a business background. But essentially, it was difficult, but I still maneuvered a little bit. And it was coming out from my own comfort zone of being a professional to a business person that I actually met so many different people. Irish people who are in business. I met loads of migrants who are in business. And my activism has still carried on. In spite of the fact that there is still business going on, there are challenges going on, my activism has still carried on. So essentially, even with the European Network of Migrant Women, being a member and down to basics essentially, even though it had a business model, it still has a social enterprise aspect to it. Because it helps and enables migrant women, especially, migrant people, but especially women, to identify opportunities that they can be able to contribute from the countries they actually came from. You see, sometimes there's always a disconnect. That's what we think, but there is such a huge connection. And my theme today of how passionate do you actually think you are is for you to identify how many migrants do you actually think are in Europe. The fastest growing economies in the world at the moment are in Africa. What can actually be exported from Poland into Africa? What exactly can be helped? What can bridge the gap in economy? So that is a link. And if you're going to be passionate about activism, if you're going to be passionate about solidarity, and if you truly care about the dignity of others, you have to come out of thinking. You have to think outside the box and stop looking at people as just purely migrants. You have to look at people as business people, professionals, people contributing to society, people contributing to economy, people contributing to the national GDP. and essentially the whole of Europe. If you look at the number of migrants who are there, they are nurses, they are lawyers, they are business people from where they came from. But the data, the statistics which are there within governments do not reflect that. All they do is they bundle everybody together and they are all migrants. Yes, they are migrants, but what specifically are they? How can they contribute to the societies that you live in? And that is why I thought it was important to bring about the idea of passion. Because passion is not just about the person living next door to you as a migrant, but the passion of your country, the passion of the region you live in. And if you're truly passionate about where you live, you have to identify the economies that hold that region together. And in holding it together, you have to understand the dynamics of linking that with the migrants that actually live in those localities. I looked at Gdańsk when I knew I was flying in, and I was impressed because I understood that there is shipbuilding, there is also the core of, it's an industrial town. And with pharmaceuticals, oil drilling, the energy sector, these are some of the sectors which are hugely linked to some of the developing countries. They need a lot of expertise, they need a lot of infrastructure, they also need partnerships in business. And the same people who come from the developing countries, where you need to identify how your regions are growing, are the same people who are discriminated against. They're the same people who are racially abused. They're the same people who, for lack of a better word, their dignity is down at the floor, if you can put it that way. So we have to identify, if you're going to be passionate about activism, you have to come out of the idea that every single person who is a migrant is a victim. Some people migrate for economic reasons, some people move because of their spouses, they get married and they move. But essentially, majority of the people have exactly the same needs as you. They want to make a better life for themselves, they still pay bills, they want better lives for their children. That is exactly the way it is. However, once you step foot in the country you're living in, you stop being a victim and you start thinking, great, so what can I do? I need to get a job, I need to pay my bills, I need to do A, B, C, D, and you save and you invest. I am yet to find any single immigrant person who does not connect with the countries they came from. They connect in terms of family, they connect in terms of investments, they build homes, they build their cities, and they build their societies. If you look at the Polish people who have moved from Poland to other European countries, essentially they have contributed to this country through remittances. So if migrants are to contribute to these countries, then essentially they also need to have a lot of solidarity. So if you're going to be passionate, you have to think outside the box. You have to think in terms of Poland. And whilst we might not be connected because I'm from Africa or I'm from an African country, we are still connected. I'll be very honest with you. When I was about 6.5 years old, I had the privilege, I never met him, but I saw him anyway. Pope John Paul II was from Poland. He was in Kenya for the Eucharistic Congress, and I'm raised Roman Catholic. And my mother made me sit in a massive park in 32 Celsius of heat for Mass for 5 hours. Looking back, obviously it was a bit much, but he was a cool person to have in the country. And obviously when I was 17 years old, even when he did return back to Kenya, of course I was wise enough to sit under a tree because it was still hot. But essentially we are connected, sometimes through religion, sometimes through the economy, and sometimes just barely through humanity. And just standing here, I'm just curious, how many people have been to any African country? Just with a show of hands. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. Anyone who's gone to any African country will tell you today that everything you see in the media is not the same. You don't see the cities, you don't see the contribution in the economy, you do not see a lot of the positives, you see a lot of the negatives. But again, that is the job of the media. Now, if the media was going to sell everything as fantastic and as 100%, it would be a bit boring. So they have to liven it up with all the bad things. That's just the way it works. And that's the way news sells. But you have to find out for yourself that The people who move from one region to the other, they bring out a lot from each other, and they bring out a lot from the communities that they live in. So we have to stand in solidarity, not because they are victims, but because these very same individuals will also be from the continent, which will be the next in terms of industrialization. And we will be trading together. We do not want to repeat history and say, well, these are the migrants who sent remittances and everything was fantastic, but their lives was not, their lives were not as good. So essentially, we need to ensure that we are fair, we are just, we are humane, and we are standing in solidarity. There are quite a number of people here who I believe would be asylum seekers. I believe they would be refugees. And their story might not be very different from so many others who have traveled, regardless of whether they came for work or to study or to... Their stories are not very different. Because essentially, if you think about it, any single person who lives from one country to the other, they have to have acquired a passport, which means they can communicate, which means chances are they are very educated. And how do you think they are contributing? They are not, because they're incomes. So you have to come out of your comfort zone, meet these people, and find out what exactly were they before they came here. It's very easy to judge when you're watching the media. It's very easy to discriminate. It's very easy to think, point fingers, and say, yes, those people and us. It's very easy to do that. But do not forget that those people are the same people who sometimes they will be relying on the government in terms of resources, whether it's monetary or otherwise. But when they come out to the society, eventually, when they come out of the camps, they'll continue relying on the same state or the same government, So they do not grow the countries, they do not grow the region. But if you step out and find out, there is a lawyer, there is an entrepreneur, partner in business. If you're a lawyer and you partner with a lawyer who is in the asylum process, that's an opportunity in business. You essentially will be having access to people you can represent in court. If you're a business person and you meet somebody else who can do business, ask them, how can we actually trade? What can we export to your country? How can we work together? And that is where passion comes in. And when passion is involved in terms of humanity, you do not have to think of other people as victims. You just have to think about them in terms of the economy. You have to think about them in terms of them being human. And you have to think about them in terms of being good neighbors. If there is crime, you have to know, essentially, who is your neighbor? And should anything happen to your neighbor, would you stand in solidarity with them? So I am very delighted. I'm grateful to be here today. And thank you very much for the organizers. I cannot, tell you enough how great an opportunity this is for myself as an individual and for the European Network of Migrant Women, which essentially has 50 organizations within the whole of Europe in its membership. But I'll still be having another workshop tomorrow afternoon in the reading room after 3 o'clock, around 3 o'clock, just after lunch. So if you're looking to speak more about various issues, technology, migrant women, migration, things like that, immigration is a bit sensitive. So we leave it to, better things. But if you do, let's meet tomorrow. Let's engage, let's talk, let's connect. And essentially, you need to be passionate. You need to constantly ask yourself, how passionate do you really think you are? Thank you very much.